Welcome back to Horrifying Stories. We've already covered a lot of animal attacks in this channel. Whether a fatal attack or a story of survival, each a horrifying story of its own. This week we feature a grueling and horrifying ordeal with the world's deadliest large land mammal, the hippopotamus. This is Paul Templar's horrifying story. Viewer discretion is advised. Hippos fall third in the largest land mammals, next to elephants and white rhinos. Male hippos range between 10.8 to 16.5 feet long and up to almost 10,000 pounds in weight. Their round-shaped bodies and short but stout legs may not look like it, but hippos can run fast on land, reaching speeds of up to 22 miles per hour. Its jaws can open as wide as 180 degrees, and their sharp canines, also called as tusks, can reach up to 20 inches in length. These large tusks are often used by hippos as weapons when attacking a prey. A hippo's bite is 3 times stronger than that of a lion's, and it can actually cut a human in half with just one bite. It may not be common knowledge, but the chances of a person dying in a hippo attack is around 86%, almost 10% higher than that of a lion attack, and more than 3 times the chances of dying from a shark attack. Although there aren't any exact figures, it is estimated that around 500 up to a maximum of 3,000 people die each year from a hippo attack. So when one of the tourists asked Paul if it was true that hippos kill more people than any other animal in a year, having had more than 6 years of experience as a canoe safari guide in Zimbabwe, Paul's answer was yes. Now, Paul wasn't supposed to be the group's tour guide that day. His friend who was supposed to lead the group called in sick due to malaria, so he took the opportunity to cover up for him. After all, he wouldn't mind touring a group around one of the most beautiful rivers, the Zambezi River. It was March 9, 1996. Their safari took off with a good start. The group went on 7 canoes. On board 4 of the canoes were Paul and 3 apprentice guides, Evans, Ben and Mike. On board the other 3 canoes were all tourists. As they took a brief stop next to a dozen of hippos waiting around in a shallow area of the river, it was there that one of the tourists asked Paul the question. They stayed at a distance from the hippos and went around to continue on with the safari. However, not long after, one of the apprentice guide's canoe, Evans, got off track. Everyone heard a very loud thud, then out of nowhere, a giant bull hippo charged right at Evans' canoe, bringing it 4 feet above the water and sending Evans to a sudden dive into the river's deeper waters. Immediately, Paul tells the rest of the group to paddle safely to shore while he approaches Evans and attempts to rescue him. He could see panic in Evans' eyes as he tried to reassure him. As soon as he reached Evans, he stretched out his hand to pull him out of the water, but before their fingers could even touch, there was a sudden and huge splash of water. The next thing Paul knew, he was in complete darkness. From his head down to his waist, he could feel he was not dry but not wet as well. He couldn't move even if he tried to, except for his legs, which he could move freely, and on one hand he could feel bristles. It was then that he realized he was inside a hippo's throat head first, and all the way down to his waist. Its throat was slimy and slippery and smelled like a rotten egg. With his one free hand, he grabbed the hippo's tusks and tried to free himself out of the hippo's throat. He succeeded with his attempt, and now he was underwater, finally out of the giant mammal's throat. As soon as he resurfaced, he found himself in front of Evans. He told him they had to get out of the water fast, and started swimming toward the shore. However, as he turned to check on Evans, he saw that Evans was just staring blankly and was not moving at all. Not wanting to leave the apprentice behind, he turned around and went back to Evans. But just as he was about to again grab Evans' hand, the hippo hit him again, and for the second time, he found himself inside the hippo's throat and started pounding on him. Then, the hippo spits him out, allowing him to swim free and try to escape once more. However, just as he was about to gain some distance, the giant bull hippo was once again right before him, heading towards him with its mouth wide open, ready to devour him. In a blink of an eye, Paul has found himself once again locked in between the hippo's jaws. This time, however, he was no longer waist deep into the hippo's throat. Instead, his head up to his shoulders were out on one side of the hippo's mouth, while his waist down to his legs was out on the other side, leaving his upper body caught under the hippo's bite. Then the hippo started to toss Paul's body, sending him to a half-twist midair before landing back into his mouth. He landed so badly that he thought his body would now be easily cut into half. Things went by in slow motion, and while this may not always be an advantage, Paul was able to use it to his advantage as he was able to think on what he needed to do. He held onto the hippo's tusks that pierced through his body, hoping his flesh would not lash out further. The next thing Paul knew, the hippo was now underwater still with its jaws clenched tightly against his body. He held his breath for as long as he could, and when the hippo resurfaced he tried to breathe in as deeply as he could as well before the hippo went underwater again. This went on for some time until the hippo seemed exhausted and dived into deeper waters. From the bottom, Paul could see the surface and his blood mixed with the river's waters. At that point, all he ever thought of was how he was going to die or if he could ever outbreathe the hippo. Hippos can actually only hold their breaths up to 5 minutes when totally submerged. To everyone's surprise, the hippo jerked upwards toward the surface and spat Paul out once more. Thankfully this time, Paul didn't have to swim by himself. Instead, Mike, another apprentice guide, mustered up the courage to paddle towards Paul, grab him onto his canoe and managed to position themselves over a rock where the hippo could no longer climb after. Immediately, Mike performed first aid on Paul, tearing a few shirts to patch on Paul, trying to stop the severe bleeding from Paul's wounds. As they tried to paddle back to shore, the blood from Paul's wounds was just too much that it started to fill the bottom of their canoe. The hippo tried to keep bumping into their canoe as they tried to make it ashore. On the other hand, another guide, Ben, paddled around to look for Evans, but it was already too dark and sadly, they found no signs of Evans. The whole group except for Evans eventually made it back to shore. Paul was in such excruciating pain but was forced to endure 8 long hours of travel time to get to the nearest hospital that had a surgeon who was capable of working on a severe case such as his. Paul Templar sustained a severely crushed left arm, especially from the elbow down to his hand. His skin and Achilles tendon had been lashed out. He had a total of 38 major injuries from the hippo's sharp bites. The hippo's tusks were even stuck into his shoulders, with both of his arms about to fall off. The other tusks were stuck through his foot, his head, at the back of his neck, at the top of his spinal column, on his face and cheek. What's even worse is that he had a punctured lung that Mike temporarily covered with a cling-wrap plastic from a plate of snacks. Meanwhile, 2 days later, they were able to recover Evan's body. He had no injuries on his body, not even one. Apparently, the panicked apprentice guide drowned to his death. Paul was able to survive, but his left arm had to be amputated. Initially, he couldn't accept what happened to him and the tragic state his body was now in. He started to blame everyone around him for how his life ended up as a complete mess. But eventually, as time passed, he slowly began to accept the reality, and he started to realize what his surgeon reminded him days after his amputation. That life is all about choices. We don't always have control over what happens to us, but we always have a choice on how we respond to it. After having been fully recovered, Paul decided to paddle back to the Zambezi River on board a canoe which had been designed specifically for him, with a single paddle. He thought he saw the same hippo that attacked him as he was paddling. Unknowingly, as soon as he saw it, he yelled at it so loud that it scared his predator away. It was the last time that he ever saw the hippo again. Paul retired from being a full-time safari guide, and now travels around the world speaking about his horrifying yet miraculous survival story. Thank you for making it this far. If you liked this video, hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We would love to hear from you. Feel free to drop any story suggestions as well. Again, thank you and see you on the next one.